everybody's enjoying this beautiful day.
Great.
We're I was Zooming with my mother and sisters and brother for a little while, so we're a little bit late getting organized, but I think we're in good shape now, so we're good. So happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there and fathers and children. Honestly, I feel like you should go to everybody. So I hope people are doing well. So today's plan, Ed is opening the wine because I'm just lounging, you know, today. We are going to talk about, today we're going to try to talk about more about white wine. We thought we were going to cover a whole lot on white wine last. This is the sweater. Oh, thank you. Who's that? Hi, Catherine. It's the plant. Yes, I finished the sweater. In fact, I was just telling in the last bits when I was talking to my mom and sisters and brother, and my mother's like, God, you're always knitting. Oh, and I said, I know, I have to be finished by the Zoom at 5 o'clock, so here I am anyway. So it's came out a little strange on the bottom, but the top looks good. We'll just leave it like this for now. Thank you. Total plant, but I like it anyway. So onto wine.
It was a better sweater for last night than today.
I know, it's a little warm.
So yeah, that brings us to, probably people are wondering, we just had 2 really cold nights. We're all good, I think. I know I walked the whole vineyard on Saturday, and we got essentially no damage from the Friday night, and it looked like last night was a little bit warmer than Friday night, so we should be okay. Yay! It's a big worry for us if you get frost in a vineyard after the shoots are out. The shoots die. The vines don't. They will grow more shoots, but what we won't have is any fruit. The secondary shoots typically have very, very little fruit on them. So you end up having to take care of a whole vineyard for a whole year, and you get nothing at the end. It's a bit of a bummer. So yeah, we've been a little nervous the last few days waiting through this frost, but we made it. So
looks good.
It's all good.
Looks good so far, which is great. So that's a relief. And we're not, I mean, usually Mother's Day is supposed to be the last day that you can get frost. Officially in Maryland, I think the record is May 22nd. So we have a few more days. I guess you can never say never, especially as the weather seems to be doing crazier things over time. But we should, if all goes well, we should be out of the woods. And I know everybody is ready for spring to actually be here. So we are hopeful on that. So that's great. Thank you to everybody who came out and picked up dinners, etc. yesterday. I hope everybody enjoyed their meals. So I'm going to put up my chat. Sorry, you should talk because I want to figure out where I can see people. Sorry for my head.
That's great. Oh, you like the Hollywood Squares version of Zoom.
Now, you guys can't tell, but now I can see you.
It is the Black Ankle Brady Bunch. That's great. So today we're going to talk a bit about white wines, but in particular Chardonnay and Gruner Veltliner.
Yes.
And we may talk and not get all the way through those 2 things because that's the way we roll around here. So, but yeah, let's start with that. We have a special bottle of GV chilling. Sean will bring in a few minutes. So, but right now I just opened a West Hills Chardonnay 2017.
So you guys see the label well enough. Here we go.
We decided to open the one from a couple of years ago instead of our current release, but coming up soon will be the 2018 Chardonnay Reserve and then the 2019 Chardonnay and Chardonnay Reserve. So there'll be some great Chardonnays coming. So let's talk Chardonnay.
There we go. Okay.
So let's talk Chardonnay first at Black Ankle. So 2002 is when we bought our farm, and you order grapevines a year and a half. Not bought the farm, not yet. We're working on that too. So it's when we bought the farm. With grapevines, you need to order a specific combination of rootstock and clone for the top and get them grafted by a nursery, or it's not always the way it works, but mostly that's the way it works. Get them grafted by a nursery. They grow them out for a year. They dig up the ones that survived and did well in the winter. They send them to us. We put them in the ground. The poor things wake up in a completely different place. It's got to be a strange thing for a plant which doesn't move, but that they do. So that's the way it works. So we planted our first vines in 2003. We planted all reds. So we did that because we decided reds take about a year longer to make. So when we opened, we wanted to have some reds and some whites. So we planted reds first. And so we had a little time to think about whites and which kind of whites we wanted to plant. And to be completely honest, Chardonnay was not on the list. What everyone told us about growing Chardonnay is that it's the canary in the coal mine for all of the diseases, for downy mildew, powdery mildew, for botrytis rot, for sour rot, that it's just a fragile, fragile grape. And we like to grow with as little input as we can, as close to being, I guess natural, I guess you would say, in our spray program as we can. So we try to shy away from anything that is really fragile. But we also naively thought to ourselves, you know what, maybe we want to make a sparkling wine too. And Chardonnay is wonderful for sparkling wine. And since you pick sparkling grapes very early, you don't have any of the rot problems.
You could just pick the sparkling wine. That would make life a lot easier. Starting with the grapes, that's really why it failed us. So the story will sound familiar if you remember our Pinot Noir story, because that's the other typical sparkling wine grape. Anyway, continue.
So we planted a little bit of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So now we're going to make sparkling wine. Long story short, we had no idea what we were doing, and it turns out making sparkling wine, the kind of sparkling wine we want to make, is not easy or cheap, or and it takes a lot of space. None of those things we had after starting this. So
and it just takes a ton of handwork and focus, and especially in the first few years when we were doing this, we realized that we had no idea. We had no idea what we were doing. So as far as making wine at all, I mean, and we, in the beginning when you're looking ahead, you're like, oh, I can learn that. Oh, I can learn that. We'll figure that out. Well, when all of it suddenly, it was all coming in, and we thought, oh my gosh, we are going to ruin all of our wine because we're going to take so much time trying to figure out the sparkling piece. So it just seemed like, never mind the equipment, never mind the expense and the space and all of that, just the mental energy and even actual physical time taken to make a sparkling seemed like it was going to be a little crazy. So we decided to, since we had Chardonnay and Pinot at that point, we decided to try to make still wines out of it.
Yep. And so here we are. So we have them. We have the grapes.
Right.
So and like quite a few things in this endeavor, it turns out that the common wisdom, I guess, doesn't really turn out to be correct. Our Chardonnay has had almost no rot problems, almost no disease problems. It's been really easy to grow. Don't know why. Maybe it likes our soils. I don't know. But we just have had very few problems with it. So we're really glad that we planted that little half acre, because otherwise we would not have figured out that it would work for us.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I will disagree a little bit. I do think it is among the more fragile varieties. Like if we are going to have a problem that we see, we are often going to see it there first. But I think it's not unmanageable. And that was kind of the sense that we had going in, was it doesn't matter how good you are in the vineyard, how careful you are, the Chardonnay is going to come and get you. You're not going to be able to take care of it. And what we found was, like, yes, maybe it's a little tricky, but it can be done. At least if you've got good air drainage and good soil and like the right kind of the right setup. So.
And the problem is we've actually had the most with it is it's not something that people talk to us a lot about, but it's the most sensitive to frost, because it's the first to bud out in the spring. It's 4 or 5 days ahead of Cabernet Franc or Albarino or those. It's probably 10 days ahead of Cabernet Sauvignon. So those, by coming alive later, they have less risk of frost. Chardonnay is the one that when we get an early frost, that's the one that gets really hit.
Yeah, so, it's true. It's true.
So at the time, it was that was back in 2003, 2004. A lot of, at least American Chardonnays, were very into, hi mom, butter and oak and sort of heavy kind of. They were not our kinds of wine, I guess, right? The kinds of wine that Sarah and I enjoy, so we thought, do we really want to plant this? I think we've come up with some different ways to do it. That now it's one of my favorite wines that we make. So. It's
funny, Chardonnay is kind of a funny grape in that I see Esme in her dino outfit. Sorry. I love it. Anyway, sorry, I'm distracted. I'll get back on topic. But if you can't see Melissa, you should scroll, because those are some pretty cute dino jammies. And they use needs to be Dijon's. I've made it through. Anyway, back to Chardonnay. So Chardonnay as a grape is a little bit, what's the right word? It's kind of considered by itself as kind of simple, that it is, it's less, you know, there are a lot of grapes that have a very kind of traditional flavor profile that they say, you know, you're talking about Viognier, you're going to expect flowers and, you know, wildflowers and like just certain kinds of aromas. Or if you have a, you know, Sauvignon Blanc, you're going to quite often have kind of grassy and petrol-y aromas that are very much considered the like typicity of the grape. Chardonnay is much more of a, I don't want to say a blank slate, but it's considered much kind of more simple on its own, and then more susceptible to changes in kind of how you treat it in the winery. When you pick it, makes a huge difference in terms of what it's going to be like. So it is one that people often then kind of play with a lot by doing, giving it a lot of oak, because it's going to pick up that, it's going to hold that oak in a way that a lot of other wines would compete with. If you try to put a lot of oak in a lot of other wines, you're going to have kind of their natural flavors and then oak flavors, and they're going to fight each other. Whereas the Chardonnay will kind of take it in a better way. I don't know. It's a little bit like, you know, putting jelly or sauce or something on like a white bread versus like a whole grain bread or something. You know, if you really want to get the flavor of what you're putting on top, you want to start with a more simple bread to begin with. Whereas if you put like an herb focaccia and then you try to put jelly on it, like, you're just going to have a fight, even if all the different parts are good. So I think that's kind of why Chardonnay has often, you see with such very different styles, because it will kind of absorb the treatments more, I guess, or the way you vinify it, the way you take care of it in the winery more than some other grapes. So
yeah, has a lot more winemaker influence.
It has, yeah.
And that's true of the flavor profile. It's got wonderful structure as a wine, much better than most other white grapes. So it gives you something to build on. Also, it's just got great weight and great structure to it. It takes barrels really well. It does a lot of things really nicely. So yeah, it's justifiably popular, I think.
Yeah. And then one characteristic also that you see a lot for Chardonnay, it tends to be very acidic. And so often people put it through this secondary malolactic fermentation, which is where you get, which I guess to back up a little bit with the winemaking, the creating wine, you start with sugar. I mean, the grapes have sugar, and they're basically like a little chemical reaction, and they, you know, yeast consume sugar, and they consume sugar and oxygen, and they create heat, alcohol, and carbon dioxide. And that's kind of like the basic, like, you remember those little chemical formulas from chemistry class in high school long ago? I remember writing those little equations, all the different parts coming together. Anyway, so once that's done, you have wine. I mean, that's kind of step one. And then all red wines and many white wines go through this secondary fermentation, which we call fermentation because as winemakers, that's what we think of. It's really, it's bacteria that create it. So technically it's an enzymatic reaction, I think is what you're supposed to call it. Isn't that fancy?
That's fancy word.
I know. And it's because fermentation has to be yeast, and this is bacteria. And there are a special kind of bacteria that are called, conveniently, malolactic bacteria. I'm sure they have a fancier, longer name, but and what they do is they basically consume malic acid, which is naturally occurring in grapes, and it's a very sharp, kind of crisp, very prominent acid. And it is, you know, I'm getting into my Latin roots. My dad would be so proud. But malic acid is, malus means apple. And if you think of that, like a very crisp, like think of a Granny Smith apple, that like super tart crispness, that is tons of malic acid. And so Chardonnay in particular starts with a ton of that. And a lot of red wines start with it too. And then this bacteria comes in and it consumes those, and it transforms that acid. And this is way, chemistry-wise, way beyond what I understand. But what ends up at the end is you have lactic acid. And lactic acid is the primary acid found in milk. And I know or at least I don't think of milk as having acid at all. And like, you're right. Basically, it's a much sort of softer, milder, rounder kind of acid. So in this transformation, you take this very kind of acidic flavor profile, very sharp and very recognizable, and you turn it into something kind of much milder and mellower. And depending on the kind of bacteria that do that process, like within the malolactic bacteria family, one of the things they can create is diacetyl, it's called, and it's basically this very buttery flavor profile. So when people talk about like a buttery Chardonnay, it just became something people did on purpose because they wanted to add a certain recognizable, interesting, appealing to some, not appealing to others. It just is very much kind of a flavor choice. But Chardonnays kind of got pushed very much in that direction, and it became kind of a, so when people have, I feel like there are a couple of grapes that people have very strong reactions to, and Chardonnay is one of them. And I think it's partly because sometimes that profile with a lot of oak and a lot of butteriness just is, it's very distinctive, and you like it or you don't like it, but you can recognize it. So it is not usually the profile that we go for. So we don't have as much, but we do go, sometimes we put our Chardonnays through this malolactic process, but we will use bacteria that just are not big creators of this diacetyl. So
if you want the buttery profile, what you do is you get a strain of bacteria. You can buy these commercially that are selected to create a lot of diacetyl, and you'll get a buttery one. It's a style choice. So yeah,
so
great.
That's right. Do you want to take the actual wine instead of just talking about it in theory?
All right. So we're two different glasses.
Glass display again, right?
This is our the Black Ankle white wine glass that we use. This is a old Riedel, I think it's called a Grand Cru Burgundy glass, made for Superfly Chardonnays.
Right.
Really different. I do not know why they're so different.
Right. So in the Riedel tasting, they talked about developing this shape of glass to combat kind of over oak and over butter in Chardonnay, that this glass, and it's funny because this is what I feel like a lot of wine glasses are like, especially old style wine glasses are this shape. And this was like worked well with kind of a big, more of a New World style. And by New World style Chardonnay, I mean in that more oaky, buttery kind of style than the kind of the old world Chardonnays tend to be more acidic and crisp and citrusy. The more buttery oaky ones did great in this glass. It was really developed with California wineries when they were making those big Chardonnays to go with that. Crazily, and this is a game you can play at home if you have a glass like this, so many other wines, when you put them in this shape glass versus whatever size this shape glass, it sucked out a ton of aroma. It was shocking.
That's what it seems with these two.
And it was really weird. So when you have the right wine for it, it worked great. I don't feel like this is really the right glass for the wines that we make at all. Anyway, but we have them, so it's kind of fun now.
These are going in the back of the cupboard. This is it's much better in this glass.
Oh, we'll break it trying to wash them later. It's okay. With these get pulled out like once every 3 years. So anyway, but it's kind of fun. So if you have the two glasses, and again, we're working on a little fast tasting, but it's fun. It's crazy how different the experience can be when you have one glass versus another. All right, so taste yours, because I haven't tasted mine. I can't smell anything because it's in this big glass.
Yeah, wonderful fresh aroma. Yeah, really nice. I love the length of this one. This so 2017. So let's talk about our stylistic change.
Whoops! Oh my God, I just poured it on myself.
We
I just spilled over myself.
Our when we first started making Chardonnays, what we adopted as a strategy is we said we know we don't want an oaky or buttery one, but we want some more ripeness in it. And so what we ended up doing is letting our Chardonnay hang a little longer than most people would. Let it get a little riper. And then what happens when it gets riper is, you get some more flavors and things, but your acidity drops. So we would then block the malolactic fermentation, which just means to add a little bit of sulfite earlier than you otherwise would, because the bacteria can't survive that. So that way we retain our acidity. And so you get a wine with some more ripeness to it, but and a really nice balance, but with a little more sharpness, I guess, to the acidity, because the malic acid is a little sharper than the lactic acid. And we loved those wines for a lot of years. And then we started drinking. I think Sarah went to a conference on making Chardonnay and talked to some Burgundian winemakers and people who made things the Burgundian way. And what they were saying is that Chardonnay, if you let it hang longer in the vineyard, you don't really get more flavors. As Sarah was describing before, it's not a great flavor producer anyway, but you lose that acid. If you pick it early, you have almost the exact same flavor profile, but you have a much higher level of acid. Then you can go through the malolactic fermentation, drop your acid down to a nice balanced level, and you get rounded, sort of softer, more structured wines, which all that you get through a malolactic fermentation. So we experimented with that in 2017. And if I'm remembering right, we made an East Hill, a West Hill, and a Reserve Chardonnay. The Reserve Chardonnay all went through malolactic fermentation. The East Hill, I think 85% or something went through the malolactic fermentation. This West Hill that we're drinking is half and half. We did about half with and half without to try to see what we like the best. And universally at the tasting, at the blending table, we liked the early picked go through malolactic better than we liked the later and block the malolactic. So we have radically changed, or not radically, but we have changed the way we make in the last 3 years our Chardonnays. And I think they're going to be even better than the ones that we really liked in the past.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Chardonnay was always an early picker. It's pretty much always the first grape that we pick, but we've started pulling it forward even more. And it's kind of nice for us because the earlier you pick it, the healthier it is. So we often struggle. And I know if you've been on my tours, I tell you, oh my gosh, if you walked into a grocery store and saw the grapes that we're putting in your wine, you'd be like, I'd turn around and walk out because you want them like shriveled and, starting to fall apart and, not rotten, but like almost there. And, when we do that, some of them go bad. We want to get them super duper right. But in order to do that, some of them get a little bit, we lose some. So this has worked out nicely. It's rare that we find a thing that's going to make the wine better and makes life easier. So that was very exciting. It's like usually we're like, oh, we need to do this, or we need to wait longer, or we need to take more risk, or something else. So the Chardonnay has worked out pretty well.
Yeah, great.
So, and there's always a question about why is something a reserve, which I see is on the scroll here, and I think you mentioned that. It's very much just we taste through and we decide that this lot is something special, and so we make it a reserve. Reserve has become kind of a weird word in the wine world because there's like so many things that are called reserve, and sometimes it means something, and sometimes it seems like it, I don't know, it's great inflation or something, and they just throw it on reserve and hope people think it's better. We struggled a lot with what to call it, and that was the best name we could come up with because we did think, people recognize it as at least being supposed to mean a little bit better. And there's no hard and fast rule about, which blocks are going to end up in the reserve, whether it's new barrels or old barrels, whether it's, we didn't talk about barrels, did we?
Next.
Okay.
Next.
Whether it's had mallow or not, it's really just, we go through, we taste, and then we try to put together in different combinations. And it's kind of the good news, bad news of Black Ankle. Sometimes you'll love a wine and you'll be like, well, how come I can't get M again? And you're like, yeah, because years go by and we can't seem to get that same combination again. Or, we'll make a wine once and then they don't slice out the same way again. So sometimes that happens.
I gotta say,
yeah.
We do have an M.
We do have an M. You can get M again. Oh,
pretty soon you'll be able to get an M.
I know. But it's only we've only made it twice out of 12 years or something. So it's just the way it works sometimes. I just mentioned briefly barrels. The Chardonnay is the only white wine that we ferment exclusively in barrel. That may be changing, but for now, that's still true.
It's changing, but
and it is kind of a funny thing about barrels. So we, in order to get, let's see, from the barrel, you can get a lot of different characteristics. What we want to get from barrels is Not a lot of oak flavor for the whites especially, and for the Chardonnay especially. We are not looking, again, it's a style choice, but what we want is not necessarily for you to pick up our Chardonnay and smell kind of vanilla or toast or, oaky flavors or oaky aromas. The other things barrels do for you is they add a lot of palate weight. So they add, and it's just because of the tiny bit of air that gets in. And we're going to spend all next Zoom, next Sunday, we're talking about barrels. So we'll get into more details of that. But in brief, one of the things you get from barrels is this kind of heftiness and weight. So if you're making a Chardonnay and you want to have kind of the weight of a barrel, but not so much the flavors, you do your fermentation in the barrel. This to me, like in sort of instinctively, is totally backwards from what you would expect. If you want to have a huge impact of barrel, you actually ferment in a steel tank and then put it in barrel afterwards. And because the fermentation happens separately and you're just kind of adding it to barrel later, you'll get a lot more barrel flavor into your wine.
And I
just kind of a weirdism of the way wine works.
When we one of the first times when Lucien came to work with us, he said, well, we have the Chardonnay, and he said, all right, well, what style do you want? And we said, we don't want it to be oaky. We don't want it to taste like a barrel.
Right.
And he said, okay, so you're going to ferment in barrel, right? And we said, no,
we
don't want it. We don't want it to taste like barrel. We said, we want it fermented stainless steel. He said, no. You got to ferment it in barrel. We said, but we don't want it to taste like barrel. And this went on for 10 minutes until he finally convinced us of exactly what Sarah said. And there's something magic about the fermentation that when you put the wine in the barrel, all those woody flavors come out, and the fermentation eats them up.
Right. It integrates in. I mean, to me, it's like a slow cooked stew or a soup or something. I mean, at some level, it makes sense. But I would think all that action going would suck all the oakiness in, and you get so much more into the wine. But it's the opposite of what actually happens. And it is funny for the fact that, like, this guy comes and we hire him and we trust him and then we fight with him all the time. But that can't be right. But that can't be right. But that can't be right. He's like, and he's very gracious. He never says, listen, you told me, you knew what you were doing, I wouldn't be here. He's very gentle.
He should say that a lot.
But he should say it a lot. But the fact is, we have to understand, at least at some level, what's going on. We don't want to just do it blindly. So that's why, and he's extremely patient with us. But we want to know, like, what do you mean? Can this be right? And if it doesn't it has to make sense to us, or we can't do it, or we will forget, if nothing else, So it has worked over time. Yeah,
and one of the things he doesn't often say things. What do you say? Like
directly.
Directly, but as 100%, you must do this.
Yeah,
he's
not.
Have this
He's not dogmatic at all.
He's not dogmatic yet, but that's a good way of putting it. But he is dogmatic about the Chardonnay. He said this: the minute it starts fermenting, it goes in barrel.
Right.
So until then, it stays in the tank as juice. But as soon as you have a bubble of any kind, get it in that barrel. If you wait even 3 days after it starts fermenting and you put it in that barrel, you're going to get more oakiness.
Right, and that's one detail to explain a little bit. So why do we wait to get it into barrel until it starts fermenting? So when any white wine comes in, we put it through the sorting machine to take it off its stems, and then just the grape goes into the press. And if you've been in the winery, it looks like that sideways rocket ship kind of is a giant press that we've got going on there. So the white wines are
sideways rocket.
A sideways rocket ship. We press them right away, and then we put the juice into tank. It sits in a steel tank. Most of the white wines go through their whole process in the tank. The reds in the tank. The Chardonnay, even though we want to ferment it in barrel, we want all the different barrels to be more or less going at the same time and in the same sequence. So we want them kind of moving along at the same pace. So if we put the juice in the different barrels right away when they were still juice, the ones that were a little closer to the door where it's slightly warmer might get a head start. The ones that were deeper in might be a few days behind. You'd have all this unevenness in fermentation. And so you'd end up with just like a more complicated situation. You might have some that didn't really get going. So we like to let the fermentation start in tank while all the wine's still together. And then we can kind of stir up the tank a little, and then we put it into barrel. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's why we're kind of watching it so carefully, but not putting it into barrel right away. So
The question, Highland and Bill, if what you said about fermentation in barrels or steel tanks true of other grapes as well? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Any white grape that you want to be oaky, fermented in stainless steel, age it in wood, you'll get oak. Fermented in the oak, you won't. And Sarah mentioned we won't get into Viognier and others today, but we always shied away from that because we didn't want oak at all in those. And we've learned that the same thing holds. If we actually ferment it in the barrel, we don't get oaky Viognier. We don't get oaky Gruner Veltliner, which we're experimenting with in barrels now. So, yeah. So that
we did last year for the first time, and ferment some Gruner Veltliner in barrels, and those wines are not out yet, but we have some barrel fermented Gruner, and we were quite happy with it. And we only did a little bit because we were a little nervous that it would be. See, even though he convinced us, he didn't convince us completely because we still only did part, just in case he was wrong when it was Gruner. So we only did a little bit because we have to prove it to ourselves. But lo and behold, it behaved like it was supposed to, and we quite like the way the Gruner came out in barrel. So there are three. I think we battled 3 different Gruner Veltliners this year. One that was tank fermented, one that's half and half, and one that was barrel fermented. And they're very different. You'll see when the time comes, but they're quite different. Yeah.
And not to put, Lucien's fabulous, not to put him on a pedestal, just in case, once in a while, he did not think the slate one should be bottled. He's like, yeah, this isn't going to be very good. I don't think you should bottle this wine. And
so there you
Ms.
go.
O'Haron
Sometimes we fight with
overruled.
I just want to try it. I like it anyway.
Then when we came back 6 months later, we tasted it, and he said, wow, this is great. This one.
Did I make this? Like, yeah, you did.
That's kind of fun. So, yeah, the other reason Sarah talked about, we keep our white juices in tank. We press them. We put them in a tank. We put a blanket of inert gas, keep oxygen off them, and we chill them for quite a few days. It's a process called stabulation, I think is I don't know how to say it in French. I'm going to say stabulation. There's something about, you keep it with its sort of gross lees in the tank as juice for a couple of weeks, and you get some interesting flavors and aromas that you wouldn't otherwise get. So we've been experimenting some with that too. So there are times where we might keep the juice for 10 days and then decide, okay, we're turning the cooling off. Let's let it start fermenting. We sort of glossed over this in all these talks, I think, but we don't buy yeast or black ankle. We did in the beginning a little bit for the and we did a couple. Yeah, there's a couple of times we've experimented with whites, but in general, and in 19 we didn't use any. We just let things ferment as they are. So that makes it a little harder to figure out when fermentation is going to start. Sometimes it starts a day after you put it in tank. Sometimes it's 8 days. Right. You just have to kind of check it every day. And we're trying to taste this juice and say, do you taste the bubble? Do you think this is fermenting? We're not sure. And then some of the crazy native yeasts that are out there in the world and that probably get on our grapes and come in from the vineyard and ferment it. Some of them we've learned in the last couple of years don't actually create CO2.
Or so little we can't find it. It's weird, yeah.
Yeah, it starts fermenting, but there's no bubble, so we don't know it's fermenting. So it makes it kind of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know, yeah. So there you go. But figuring out when Chardonnay, at least with a white, you don't have all skins and stuff. You can look in the tank and you can see bubbles coming up.
Yeah.
So
and we say the minute it starts, it's not. He always says it's a matter of hours. It is a matter of hours. There's never we are not. It's not brain surgery here where every minute would truly count. But it is, days would be bad. Hours are fine. Not bad, but it would change what we were doing. So yeah. And the one thing we do have, which we've said or referred to, is but yeast don't like cold. So we make the tanks very cold, and that will keep the yeast from interacting too much or from getting going. So if you've, here comes, there's Simon's tail. If you've ever made bread, you have to get it going. You use warm water to do it. You want to keep it in a warm oven, or not hot, but kind of warm. So we can control when fermentation starts a little bit by keeping the tank very cold or letting it get warm, and that'll help. So with that.
Great.
Yeah. So have you ever thought about growing riscatelli? I can't even say it, but we haven't looked at it yet. And then I'll tell you about M in a minute. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, I have a question behind.
Arcatatelli a grape that mostly is grown in Georgia and the country of Georgia,
country, right.
and in Russia. And yeah, we have some friends who grow it in the East, and I know it's apparently pretty good.
Right, yeah.
But no, we haven't really thought of it. We have other things that we'd like to plant ahead of that.
Yeah, but it's out there. What is M? Sorry, I referred blithely to M. So M is a blend that we have made twice now, I think, and it was the first one I think we made in 2011, and it was 50% Merlot and 50% Malbec. So it was just a wine. It was just something different that we'd made, and again, it was just at the blending table. Those wines kind of came together, and we liked it. And then, of course, some people loved it, and then we just didn't have that quite mix available for a while. But I think we made it in 18, must have been 17. In 17, we made it again. So there's some, there's some in bottle. So
some of you remember the 15. But the idea with the 11 is let's make a wine that is sort of Malbec-y in character. We have a very small plot of Malbec. Usually it goes into Rolling Hills. That year we decided to pull it aside, put a little Merlot in it, and try to make something that has sort of a Malbec kind of character to it. In 2015, the Malbec was absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And so we decided to keep it aside and do the same thing again. And I think that one was 75 or 80% Malbec with a few other things in it.
Yeah.
And that was maybe certainly the red wine that surprised me the most in my time doing this, because it just was so good. And the Malbec is usually nice and very exuberant and outgoing, but not necessarily have a lot of length or great structure to it. That 15 was just unbelievable, and that M was a fabulous 15 wine. The 17 is really good too. So again, mostly Malbec. So what the M, we joke that really the story is it was named after the fact that it's Merlot and Malbec, but we were trying to come up with a name for it, and who came up with that name? Her name is Melissa, and we decided
I have the perfect one.
I have a perfect name. I'm just going to name it after myself. So that's really what happened.
And why not? Right.
And why not? She deserves it.
Exactly.
Tom, do a handstand if you think Melissa deserves that.
Right. Of course. There you go. Lots of handstands out there. Their question about how do you decide what goes into new versus used barrels, I think, and the answer to that is usually it's a mix. So most of the wines we pick will go into some combination. This cat is shedding everywhere. Sorry. We'll go into some combination. If you can see the cap for wine, sorry. Here. We'll go into some combination of new and used barrels. So it's generally just a question of how much will go in one versus the other. So for the white wines, we tend to have a very light hand as far as new wood goes, because the new wood can kind of overwhelm pretty quickly. In our Chardonnays, I would say usually we put maybe 25% new wood for the total, because it tends to be noticeable. For the reds, it's a whole different calculus, and it's really just depending a lot on kind of the depth and concentration of the juice going in. So if you have like big, strong juice going in, it can take more new wood. But even so, we usually like to have a mix so that we don't have like an overwhelming barrel influence, I guess I would say. So yeah. We're getting into next week, but there are times where we like the once used oak better than the new oak on things. Right. That said, the Chardonnay Reserve is typically mostly new oak. As long as it doesn't get too oaky, the structure you get from a new barrel is wonderful. So you can decide on your own. Often the Reserve has got a lot more new oak than say the regular Chardonnay, or if we make a West Hill and East Hill, then they will. So yeah.
Great.
The rest of our questions.
All right, we're checking our question list.
East Hill, West Hill. All right, I think we should get on to Gruner, right? Does that cover Chard? Any more Chardonnay questions?
Do we have time? We cover Gruner in 20 minutes?
Sure.
All right, we're
only Gruner.
Okay, GV.
So why do we decide to grow it? How much is grown, and when was it first planted? Okay, so I mean the always why do we decide to grow it was because we like it. And Gruner is one of the nice qualities of it. So I think Ed touched on briefly, but we try to kind of grow as sustainably as we can. We want to kind of be as unchemical happy as you can be. Can that make sense? Like try to just like be as environmentally friendly, I suppose, as we possibly can be in the vineyard. And that is a big, it's a big concern for us, partly just from a ecological standpoint, and partly because honestly, the less you can intervene chemically with the vines, the more, the better the wine is going to be at the end, the more the place can kind of express itself and we can kind of have our own flavor profile versus this like standardized situation. So Gruner is nice because it has relatively thick skins, and the thickness of the skin helps protect it against fungus, which is our big issue in terms of vine health or fruit health. And it is very nice because it can make an interesting wine at a very wide span of ripeness levels. So there are wines, there are grapes that you really need to pick in a very tight window to have them be ripe enough and not overripe. Merlot is probably the most fussy. I feel like, as I say, we're never like down to the minute, but within a few days, maybe a 4 or 5 day window, if you don't get it right, when you pick it, you're going to have unpleasant flavors on one side or the other. Gruner changes pretty dramatically as it gets more ripe, but from very early to very late, it can make a nice wine. So in a climate, and especially when we were first starting out, where we have a lot of humidity, we have rain, we might have hurricanes in the fall, like we're not so sure what our end of season is. We don't know what any of the year is going to be like, but we don't have reliable weather. It's nice to have some wines where we have some flexibility and we can say, oh my gosh, there's a horrible storm coming. Let's pick this early this year, or we're having beautiful weather. Let's let it hang longer. And either way, we'll get a nice wine as opposed to really compromising on the quality. So that's great. And our late harvest, I mean, our Terrasol, our late harvest wine is Gruner Veltliner, and we've made lots of, early picked ones. So that's kind of cool. So this is a very special wine, right? Is that what you got?
This is a very special wine.
It looks so bright. It looks like real.
Show you this.
Can you see it up there?
See all the dust on that?
It's probably hard to tell.
This, we did this without any ceremony.
I know.
You probably can't read it. It's a Gruner Veltliner 2007. This is the first bottle of wine we ever bottled. And we just opened it.
Yay! Like literally like the first one that came down. You can see it's signed by the bottling guy. Like, whatever. He's like, I'll sign it for you. And then I think I signed it. Maybe. I don't even think so. Yeah. I think it's just Gary.
There it is. Yeah. Number one. So this is the first official bottle of Black Ankle Vineyards.
First bottle ever roll out the wine. Yeah.
And we actually did make a little 2006 Bedlam. So a wine from an earlier
vintage. Yeah, but we didn't bottle it first. Right?
And we bottled at the same time, but for some reason we started that day bottling with the 2007 Gruner Veltliner. So this is like literally the first bottle of wine that ever came out.
I know. I remember it well.
So okay, so there's more of a story.
Right, and then we took very careful care of it, and we cellared it perfectly.
We cellared it perfectly.
We're so organized
for the last 13 years. In other words, we put it in the winery on top of the electrical box, and we left it for 13 years. If you've gone on a winery tour, if you notice, there's been a bottle of wine on top of the electrical panel, and got warm, hot in the summer, cold in the winter, everything you should not do to a bottle of wine. We said, that's our bottle of wine number one. We'll just leave it there. We just sort of forgot about it for 13 years.
Anyway,
and
here it is. So we'll see how it is.
And wow, if you're wondering how our wines are going to age, this is
terrible.
Pretty darn good.
All things consider,
Not terrible. That's a light toady. This is good. This is great. I'm really happy with this. I mean,
good, yeah.
The color's beautiful.
It's got a little like petrol-y going on. Like the nose is a little different than I would say for a fresh Gruner.
Like an old Riesling a little bit, but oh my gosh, the palate.
Wow, it's really held up. That's kind of fun. That's pretty crazy.
Oh, that's kind of fun. Wow. Off of young vines. First one. Okay. All right. Yeah, we're pretty happy with this.
That's fun.
So
there you go.
That's fun.
So
here it is.
The bottle doesn't look better. It's so grotty and beat up. So we can't even make a lamp out of it. Like
that's part of its charm.
That's part of its charm.
It's still got years of grime on it. Yeah, the labels all. Oh,
There you go. So that's kind of fun.
That first label paper we used that first year was terrible.
Oh,
It wrinkled everywhere. Oh
wow.
my
Yeah.
gosh. Anyway, back to, so back to GB. So ages really well.
Yeah.
And when we first started this, it wasn't Albarino where everybody said that doesn't age at all, but it was a wine that we thought, well, it ages okay. And I know you should tell the story of Nikolaev when you went there, that 15-year.
Oh yeah, it's like top secret, but I guess it's out now. But yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, so I went on a little wine tour in Austria in ski season. Conveniently, when you're
with two of your best friends.
I know. Well, you know. As it turned out, the wine drinking was a lot better than the skiing. I've turned into a chicken in my old age. But anyway, that's another story. But I went to Nikolaev, which is a big producer in the Wachau, which is a big Gruner. If you're actually German, you'd probably be cringing right now. Yeah. So anyway, in one of their wines
are fabulous.
They make great wines.
Really good wines.
The actual coolest thing about there were a lot of cool things about this place. They have been around for like 1,000 years or something, right? I mean, they've been around literally forever. And they had this tree in their courtyard. I know this isn't what we're supposed to be talking about. But they had this tree, they had this big courtyard, which had the kind of pea gravel that we were supposed to have at Black Angle. It was what the vision was. It's not what we had, but it was like firm packed and you could walk on it and it didn't ruin your shoes. And it had this enormous shade tree that was probably like an acre big. Anyway, it's very, very cool. And they had a press that had been used for like 800 years, an old wooden press where it was like a beam that was this big and this screw, probably like you could just spin it around. They would have horses go around the edge of this room to kind of grind down to press the wine. But they were also doing lots of experiments with aging Gruner. So not just from a tourism standpoint, I learned a few things. And one was that they had some that they were aging in acacia vats then they were keeping them in the vat for like 10 or 12 years before even bottling them. Yeah. So it was just kind of, and it just made us feel like, oh wow, there is a lot more that we could play with Gruner a lot more, because what we had tasted here was kind of what was the more standard wine Gruner Veltliner in 2003. It was hard even to get in the United States. We would just joke that the Austrians made it and they drank it all, and that's kind of true. It's the number one wine grown there, but not a lot was exported, and what was tended to be very nice, but just the basic, like, picked a year ago, fermented, aged 6 months, and bottled, and your basic table wine kind of, which is a lot of what we make. I mean, very nice wine, but you never really saw these late harvest or aged in barrel or aged in cask. And these casks were those giant, like the size of a tank, those giant wooden ones, that again were I think 100 years old or hundreds of years old. That was pretty cool. So anyway, it's been kind of fun.
Really neat.
Yeah.
And so when we decided we want to try to plant GV, once again, no one had it. The nurseries had never heard of it or planted it, and we spent again 6 months. We found again Davis had 2 vines. UC Davis had 2 vines in their collection, and then but that wasn't enough to graft from. And then we finally found our friends at Westport Rivers Winery up in Massachusetts had 50 vines that they had gotten from the cuttings at Davis. So they sold us cuttings from their 50 vines, and we got, I think, 900 vines we planted of GV the first year, and I think that was either the biggest planting in the country or second when we planted it in 2004.
It was half an acre. It was about half an acre. It was tiny, but it was still.
And so, since then, a few have put it in, and quite a few on the East Coast have put some in. But it was a real experiment, and So
that's been fun.
And we at the time thought it had thick skins, and it would be much easier in the vineyard than, say, Chardonnay, which is really hard. I don't think there's any difference in the vineyard between how easy to grow Chardonnay or GP. They're both relatively easy, but they both have some issues sometimes too. So
depends.
Yeah, the reputation quite good.
It has good grapes. I mean, a lot of the grapes, the actual in the grape form, are not that tasty, but Gruner's really yummy. I shouldn't tell you that. Don't eat the grapes for wine. But if you are going to eat grapes, you should eat Gruner, because they're really good when they're still in grape form.
On that subject, the best grapes in the world if you want to go into a vineyard and steal grapes, don't do that. But if you do, the Muscat grapes are the best. They are super tasty. Fabulous.
They are super tasty. Yeah.
Muscat grapes.
We wouldn't notice that.
Yeah, we do have a little. We won't have a night to talk about it, but we do have I don't know, maybe 80 Muscat vines, 173. There you go, Muscat vines that were a nursery mistake. It was supposed to be Syrah, and sprinkled in with this Syrah that we got were a bunch of Muscat vines. So, but boy, those grapes are good.
If you drive in, if you come in the entrance and you look to your right during harvest time when everything's growing, that block is all Syrah. And if you look carefully, you'll see a few white grapes mixed in, and that's where the Muscat's hiding. So they are good. They are pretty tasty.
Yeah, really good. So GB.
VGV, I see questions about VGV, which is a blend we've made. We've made twice now, because we made one, I think, also in 2011. 2011 was kind of a crazy year, so we did all kinds of experiments. But and it was just a blend. It was Viognier and Gruner Veltliner blended, and we just blended it again the same way this year. So there is one in bottle, just from 2019. And again, you know, like I say, we sit down to blend and we just mix and match and put things together and try to figure out what we like. And for some reason that year, I think the Viognier, I think the Gruner just it had a little more crispness and acidity than the Viognier, and we put them together. They just really kind of like made each other pop a little bit. So we made it, and we liked the combination. And then again, we really didn't have the quantities to do that for a couple of years, but last year, partly due to popular demand and partly just because we could figure it out at the blending table, we were able to make one again. So we have done another VGV, so that should be out. I don't know, it'll be the next end of summer sometime. We'll have it out again, but we have it there. Yeah. So.
All right. So two quick things I want to get in before we have to go. And not far. So winemaking, GV. So in the vineyard, it's relatively straightforward. As Sarah said, very flexible, and it's quite nice to grow. In the winery, it's a bear. It's much harder than our other white wines to make, and it's taken us years to try to figure out what to do with it. And there are two main reasons. One is it loves to get reduced, and reduction is, I don't know.
We're back into chemistry, but basically it eats too much oxygen, and that creates this like sulfur aroma.
Yeah, and you lose all of the nice aromas, and it just tastes like a freshly struck match or something.
Yeah,
it's very
smell.
Yeah, and that will eventually go away. You can even bottle it like that and wait a couple of years, and it will eventually go away. But we struggle with it, or we have in the past. We think we've kind of conquered it. I'm not sure. We're trying different things with the GV to get around that. And the second is that it is a protein monster, and proteins are they exist in all wine grapes and wine. But if you have a lot of protein and the wine gets a little bit warm, and that can be 70 degrees even,
depends on the wine.
Sometimes the proteins will come out of solution. Again, I'm getting into chemistry, and I don't know chemistry. So
polymerize. They all come together.
And so what it doesn't, it makes a wine cloudy. If you put a blindfold on, you would never know. It tastes exactly the same. There's no difference, but it will look cloudy.
Yeah. And if it's very strong, it can actually look like there's something floating in the bottle.
Yeah.
It'll almost look like there's like a spider web floating in the bottle or something. And it's harmless. It doesn't change the flavor, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not visually appealing.
It's not visually appealing.
People are like, that's what I want, you know. It looks like a flaw. So
to be
dealt with. Yeah.
With white wines, you have to do a test, and basically we kind of boil-ish the wine and let it you do a heat test, and then you see if it goes cloudy. And the only real treatment there are two real treatments. One is to leave the lees on the wine, which is all the dead yeasts and everything from the bottom of the fermentation. Instead of cleaning the wine off of that, leave it on, stir that. That helps a little bit, not a lot, but it helps quite enough. And for wines that don't have a lot of proteins, and if you stir the lees a lot. So our other wines, at least the last few years, Albarino, Chardonnay, Viognier, have not needed any extra help. They've been heat stable, protein stable,
as
as it comes. The GV never is. So because it has a lot of proteins, and Sauvignon Blanc is the same. We're going to start making that in a few years, and Sauvignon Blanc is also a protein monster. So the cure for that is bentonite clay. So when you see a wine fined with bentonite, you take this, basically, it is a clay. It's mined out of the earth.
It looks like flour when you use it. It's like super powdery. Yeah.
And you mix it with some water. You let it expand. The stuff expands and absorbs all of the water. And then you put it in and you stir it in the wine, and it binds with proteins, and then it sinks to the bottom. Right. And then you take the wine off, and all the proteins, or not all the
enough come out that you don't. Yeah.
And so,
it's another little chemistry. The proteins are positively charged, and the clay is got a negative charge, and so the two of them want to stick together. And then when they stick together, they're heavy enough that they can fall out of solution. When the proteins are just floating, they're dissolved in the wine. So you do this to like just suck them back out of the wine, and then they'll fall to a silt in the bottom of the tank.
Yeah. So pretty much every white wine in the world is fined with bentonite, unless like us, you have some wines that you can take and stir the lees for a while, and they don't have too much to begin with. Then the wine will be stable without it, which is a great luxury. So if any of you remember way back to 2008, we had a really nice GV that we made in 2008, and then it started going a little cloudy right after we released it in bottle, because we store it, at 60 degrees in our warehouse, and it's perfect and everything, and then we start releasing it, and customers take it home, and it's 73 degrees, and it started going cloudy. We had to go to stores and buy back or take back all the out there, and it tasted wonderful, but it went cloudy, so we learned our lesson of that one. Whoops.
Exactly. Hooray for hydrogen bonds.
So that's good. So and then the other thing I want to make sure we get in about GV. GV has always been a very a favorite wine among chefs and sommeliers, and the reason is because GV has a taste profile that no other wine has. GV matches with things like asparagus.
True.
Things salad, like
vinegar. I mean, you can drink it with, right?
Artichokes. There are things that just destroy wines, and asparagus is one of them. It's hard to find a wine that goes well with asparagus, but GV does. It goes well with so many different foods that chefs love it, because it makes their food better. So it was always much more popular in restaurants with sommeliers who understood that, this is going to make it. People are going to have this wine, and they're going to think this food is really good.
Right, it helps pair a lot. Yeah.
And that is really kind of a great compliment to a wine. It's when you think, oh, this meal is wonderful. So
it's a good go-to if you're looking for a pairing and you don't really know what to do. It's a good guess for lots of things.
Another one is Asian food and Indian food. GV goes with those much better than a lot of other wines do.
And even if you get into anything with a little spice, like I remember having it with it was at a Cajun restaurant, and it had like some blackened fish and like a jambalaya or something, and it went with that. Like things that often will kind of overwhelm a lot of wines, it can often work well with. So I think that's the first time I ever had a Gruner. I was at this New Orleans restaurant, New Orleans style restaurant, and they had it, and it just paired great with that kind of that kind of spice profile. So
I wish I could share this 2007 with you.
We'll bring it up to
this is the problem with this. I wish you could just pour a glass for everybody.
Exactly.
That would be the best.
Splash it into your little cube on our square someday.
Wow. This makes me smile this morning.
And I see, Rick, your question, how do you keep track of all the differences between all the wines? Spreadsheets? No. A lot of it is just practice and trial and error, but we do have massive spreadsheets where we're writing down everything we do and taking notes. And at the end of the year, we do a big, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? What are we supposed to remember next year? And if we're lucky, we get it. We remember to look at them the next year.
And sorry about the teas. I couldn't resist.
I know. Look at it. Oh, I think I'll have some more too, just to be evil.
And hooray for hydrogen bonds. I don't know what it means, but it sounds good.
Because that's what's making the bentonite work.
Is that what it is?
Yes,
Okay.
totally.
That one right over my head, but where's Sean? Sean, in here, tell us.
Chemistry is our friend. We don't always understand it, but it's helping us a lot. Right? Am I right? I'm looking for the reaction.
Chemistry
like, no, it has nothing to do with bentonite.
No. Yeah, we probably just misspoke about 12 times.
I know. We have to see if there's any chemists. Is it hydrogen bonds that's making the
Sean, come here. We're
protein out
talking
of
about
solution? We're bringing our resident
What's
chemist here.
happening?
Anyway.
our chemistry major is going to come in. So we were talking about finding our wines with bentonite clay to make them more protein stabilized.
Okay.
And Purple wrote, "Hooray for hydrogen bonds." And I'm like, woo, right over my head. I have no idea what that means. So, yeah. Do you have any idea what that means?
I mean, I'm not sure like how it applies in this particular case on like a micro level, but I can give you like my best guess, which is hydrogen bonds are.
That was all right. Now we're gonna get Sean in there. All right, your best guess, Sean.
See?
All right.
Exchange.
So yeah, so what hydrogen bonds are basically gonna do is they're gonna basically. And so you have the bonds that keep molecules together, and then between the molecules, you have different kinds of bonds that basically happen because of like less important forces than the things that hold molecules together. They're not as strong, but they're still there. And that's why like solids hang together, because all the molecules are tightly bound to each other. And then as you heat them up, those bonds get looser, and then things become liquids and gases. So I'm guessing what happens is when you put it in this clay, it then can produce hydrogen bonds with what it's bonding to, and in doing so stabilize them. And hydrogen bonds are just the strongest.
It pulls it out of solution.
Yeah, so it probably like binds to them and then just weighs them down enough or makes them insoluble enough that they settle out.
Sounds good to me.
I don't know if this point in life is a point of pride or depression, but our kids are smarter than we are. Like this is, I don't know.
It's been a while.
Am I happy about that? Should I be happy about that or depressed?
I think so. I think it's good.
All right. Okay. Anyway.
All good.
All
right.
Thank you, Sean.
On that note, that we have been outsmarted by our kids.
All right.
Which is probably true. All right. So I have to do logistics. You guys can, if you have more, you got your money's worth. I don't know. I hope so. It's a lot of money going out.
Yes. Not yet. No.
On polarity. There you go. We're going to study up on this and get a really long chemistry lecture for next week. But next week's Zoom happy hour is going to be all about barrels, which involved a little chemistry, I think. So we're going to do the barrel tasting. All right, there we go. All right, maybe we'll have Sean and Kirpal do a Zoom. They'll talk, and then we'll get the story straight, and then we'll cycle back with the true answer. I see you. You don't have to. We won't force you to do it. It's okay. Like, don't you want me to volunteer you for things? I see that happening. It's all good. So next week we're going to talk about barrels and kind of what's the point of barrels? What goes on? What do they do? I think it would be fun to try wines that have had different barrel treatments. So the best way you can mimic that at home is to have like a slate or a feldspar, which are wines that have spent a lot of time in barrel, and then something like a Rolling Hills or even a Crumbling Rock, which have spent less time in barrel. It's the easiest at-home mimic. You don't have to do that, but that would be one way of kind of trying to do the comparison. We're trying to get a sense of what we're talking about kind of what happens in barrel. Yeah. Like an older one and a younger wine.
Cut a piece of an oak tree and stick it in your glass of wine and just drink it, see what happens.
I'm missing so much about it. Anyway, we are still doing our pickup hours, just like always. So Saturdays from 1 to 4, curbside. We're going to keep doing that for the foreseeable future. And then I think I talked briefly about this last week, but we've started doing these virtual tastings, which we've done a few already, and people have had a lot of fun with. And basically for that, you can, we'll set you up on a Zoom or a FaceTime or whatever the easiest technology is, and you will be paired with one of our staff. Usually if you're in the wine club, you're kind of wine club concierge, like your contact person or somebody like that. It's a good way to get to know them a little bit better. And then spend 45 minutes to an hour, and they will taste through wines with you, talk about our wine, answer specific questions. We can go through your cellar, we can get you wine, whatever. It's totally, it can totally be driven by you, and you can invite as many friends. You know, we'll set up a Zoom for you and as many friends as you want. So people have been having fun with it. So far, we've been having fun doing it. So that's out there. There's no charge or anything on. You just get on our website or email us, and we can set you up with that if you're interested in even more Black Ankle time in your week. And I think that's my main. Did I miss any big logistics? Zoe's saying, and I did it. We covered them all. So, yeah. Anyway, so everybody hang in there. Thanks again for joining us, and hope everybody has a lovely evening. So take care. Yeah.
If you come by pickup next week, you might see some big changes out front.
Oh, we're making progress. We gotta hope for a dry week. So we're making progress. Yeah, we're getting there.
It's great.
Anyway.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great week.